Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm back with another list video for all of you. I'm going to be talking about must-read father and son comic books. This might sound like an interesting prompt, but frankly I was looking through my library and I was looking at just how many books really left an impact on me just looking at the father-son dynamics across some of these stories. This is kind of an eclectic and interesting list in my mind, and I can't wait to jump in and share it with all of you. Before we do though, I want to go ahead and shout out the channel's sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can even use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's list. First up, in no particular order, we have a personal favorite of mine, Daredevil, Battlin Jack Murdock by Zeb Wells and Carmine di Giandomenico. This is a fantastic miniseries. I've talked about it a couple times on the channel already. It actually might be time for me to do just a straight up review for it. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in the comments. But this story is kind of a Daredevil origin retelling, but it's much more than that. This is kind of the untold story of Daredevil's father, Battlin Jack Murdock, the famous kind of washed out boxer who left such an impression on his young son. Jack Murdock, for all intents and purposes, was a single father, raising a son who just adored him, kind of hung the moon on his father. His father used to be a boxing big shot, but is now kind of past his prime, but still trying to support his family. Because of this, he kind of gets mixed up with the fixer, who's kind of, well, trying to fix boxing matches, maybe having some kind of more underhanded kind of criminal dealings that he wants Jack to be kind of a pusher or kind of a big muscle kind of guy for him, and he kind of gets caught up in some of these things he maybe doesn't want to be a part of, but he feels like he needs to help support his family. Along the way, we have, of course, Matt Murdock, his son, the boy who will one day be the man without fear. Matt gets blinded in the accident that gives him his kind of radar sense, and we have Jack just struggling even more with some of these decisions he's making. He knows that he has to support his family, but he knows he also has to be an example for his boy, who looks like he needs help now more than ever. Yet we know he's already being trained to be Daredevil, and he's already kind of doing stuff kind of behind the scenes in the background of this work here. Ultimately, we do have a culmination to the storyline that feeds directly into a key point in the Daredevil mythos, especially in regards to what happens to Jack Murdock. It's wonderful, it's powerful, and you get this kind of feeling that the impression Jack Murdock is left with as he has his final bout is a really good one, believing in the promise that his son has for the future. A beautiful book. Don't miss out on Battling Jack Murdock. Next on my list today is an independent comic book I just fell in love with earlier this year, The Underwater Welder by Jeff Lemire. This is really great. Someone described it as kind of like an episode of The Twilight Zone in comic book format, and I couldn't agree more in the most complimentary fashion I can. This is a black and white story about a man who is, you guessed it, an underwater welder. He has his own degree of father issues after his father kind of vanished, presumed dead when he was a boy. He's a man now, and he has a baby on the way himself, and right at this crossroads in his life, he encounters kind of an otherworldly appearance of a relic from his past as he is under the water. And when he goes back to investigate, he gets kind of lodged into this alternate world, like kind of wasteland version of his coastal town, and therein he kind of gets the echoes of his past and has an opportunity to confront these issues he had about his father. Long before his father disappeared, there was a history of alcoholism and neglect that he really hasn't been able to shake, and it really is kind of helping to influence kind of what he thinks about fatherhood as he's at the cusp of it himself. This is a truly human and intimate story and look at kind of a father-son dynamic, and I really love that it's kind of juxtaposed with his own journey into early fatherhood. I love the kind of otherworldly, surreal feeling of this story as well. I love the device that he kind of goes out of sync with his normal reality. I think that that is a great way to explore the really truly human sides of this, even in kind of a paranormal feeling environment. I don't even know how to describe it, but the series here is really a wonder. This is a book that many could read in one sitting, and in fact, that's probably how I'd recommend reading it, just for that singularity of effect. This is a book that I just breezed through, but I know I'm going to revisit again and again as time allows. A truly gripping father-son story that leaves a lot of hope and a lot of just great reflections on what these dynamics leave and the impact they can have on an individual. Really, really loved Lemire's Underwater Welder. Don't miss out. Next up, we have an Image comic, Rogue Sun, Volume 1 from Ryan Parrott and Abel. This is part of the Massive Verse, same universe as Radiant Black and Dead Lucky and things like that. But this is a series I had heard recommended to me by a few people. It's kind of a supernatural-themed superhero narrative from Image, and it really does also go into a kind of destructive or broken father-son dynamic. I have a feeling, even after just reading this first volume, that there is going to be some breakthrough or reconciliation between the father-son characters here. But this is an example of a father was a superhero that kind of walked out on his young family, and the boy who's grown up to now be a kind of gruff and edgy teenager who's confronted with his father's legacy upon his passing. He's now carrying the mantle of a superhero role his father had that he didn't even know about. His father kind of shows up kind of astrally in his mind as he wears the suit, and we really have a lot of interesting character interactions and conflicts. And I think, again, this is not like a paragon of father-son dynamic that I'm bringing this up. This is just a really captivating comic book story that's centered around a father-son narrative. I don't think all the father-son stories I'm talking about here are worth emulating, but I think that all of them are really telling and just interesting as a narrative dynamic. And certainly in this series here, I think that father-son dynamic is a real just root for the series. I think narratively everything kind of comes from that relationship and what legacy looks like and what the effects of the past have on a young family and things like that. The art here from Abel is really beautiful as well. This series is honestly a trip. I did do a full review of this volume if you're interested in more details, but it's definitely a superhero story with a bit of a twist. Love the art, like I said. I think Ryan Parrott did a great job with the writing as well. The characters feel very fleshed out, lived in, authentic, and I really just like this world. In fact, I'm hoping to get a volume 2 for this eventually, but still really satisfied with the volume 1 here. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos like this, reviews, things like that. Thank you so much for considering. Now on with the show. Next up on the list, Batman, Batman and Son by Grant Morrison and Andy Kubert. This is effectively the start of the proper Grant Morrison run or era in DC Comics. Yes, he wrote other Batman stories before this, but this is the start of his proper run, and this introduces us to the character of Damian Wayne. I should say that with a bit of a caveat. He was kind of introduced in an old Ra's al Ghul story, kind of in the back, but basically Grant Morrison really brings this character to life, and we get to see the beginnings here of how Damian starts to have an impact in the Batman mythos. Batman discovers he has this child, and we get to see Damian, who was raised by assassins his whole life, go to his dad, who is this costume crime fighter, against the ways of killing, and we get to see how he kind of just acclimates to that world, or maybe fails to do so. We also get to see Bruce Wayne as a proper father. And granted, he served in that role so many times, especially with the Robins throughout the years, but with Damian, it's a little bit different because Damian is blood, and seeing some of the differences there are really interesting, you know, and there's also this kind of nature versus nurture dynamic, and what does he do when he can't write off his son, but his son was raised to have these values he doesn't have? He crosses these lines that Batman won't cross, and how does he help shape this boy rather than just toss him aside? And I really like how all of these familial questions kind of come to a head. Even in this early volume, we have some real, I'm going to call it sibling dysfunction between Tim Drake and Damian Wayne throughout this, some pretty intensive drama. I do think that it takes a while for this father-son dynamic between Bruce and Damian to ripen into something really worth emulating, but in these early stages, we still see Batman just trying to come up to the plate and be a real father here, and I do think that that's admirable. I also think this added a really unique spoke in the wheel of the Batman mythos that I think is so much better for it. I personally love the character of Damian Wayne. I love seeing what Damian brings out of Bruce Wayne. Obviously, he's been a father to all of these other Robins, but to see him with Damian, it's just a whole different thing in many ways. I really like Batman and Son, and I really like the rest of the Morrison run as well. Really appreciative he added this spoke to the Batman mythos. Another great Batman and Robin father-son dynamic we get is what we see in the Batman and Robin run from Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason. I have the Omnibus here, but this is another Bruce Wayne, Damian Wayne based story, and honestly it's a run that's primarily about that relationship. And I won't go into any spoilers here, suffice it to say that the journey those two take throughout this whole run is pretty dynamic and eye-opening. I'm really impressed with how these creators were able to bob and weave around some of the events that occurred in even other series that were occurring concurrently around the same time, like Grant Morrison's Batman Incorporated. But again, no spoilers here. But what we get in this collection is a really great look at that father-son dynamic that Grant Morrison started in Batman and Son. We now get to see a more tender view of it as Damian has really started to just love his father even more, and we get to see more of Bruce's love for Damian as well. Of course, Robin still has some edges, but we get to see much more of that paternal aspect to Bruce in this collection, and it really plays that up. We get to see so much of Gleason's art, which is honestly sometimes pretty grotesque or graphic or gruesome. We get to also see just this beautiful tenderheartedness that Gleason's art brings to the depictions of these moments between father and son. There's moments in this collection that honestly bring a tear to my eye just thinking about it. I love how much this creative team seemed to focus on that theme of fathers and sons and fatherhood. This was a run that, again, had so many challenges going for it between when it started into the New 52 era and trying to just really be the best supporting book, it feels like, next to Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman run and the tail end of Grant Morrison's tenure on Batman Incorporated. I really feel like this book was maybe the one that got pushed aside by editorial, but it's amazing how much they were able to do with maybe some of those mandates that were happening based on the other Batman series. This is honestly a wonderful run, even beyond just that father-son dynamic, but certainly that is the core of this book for me, and that is what makes it such a standout in my eyes. Next up, we have Robert Kirkman's Invincible from Image Comics. This is, of course, a great father-son story. It's obviously much more than that, but the father-son dynamic between Omni-Man and Invincible is one really that echoes through the history of comics in my mind. This is one of the premier Image Comics superhero books. It was one of my favorite single closed comic series I've ever had the pleasure of reading. This is the first Ultimate Collection. I do have all 12 of these editions that collect the entirety of the series, and wow, what a ride. Of course, it has an amazing animated adaptation that's still ongoing, but for those that maybe are unfamiliar with Invincible, it's the story about a boy who grows up. He's in high school now. He's living kind of a mundane life, other than the fact that his dad, Omni-Man, is kind of like that world's Superman, and all of a sudden one day in his teen years he develops superpowers all his own, and he can't wait. He takes on the name Invincible. His dad gets him properly outfitted in a superhero costume, and he becomes the newest teenage superhero within this universe. Along the way, though, everything is maybe not as it appears in Invincible's world, especially as it pertains to his father. I won't go into too much depth there. Suffice it to say that it is rich narrative ground, and it's such a complex father-son relationship throughout the entirety of that series. It's absolutely dynamic, it's really rich in character development, and I love seeing those two play out their story across the years that this book was in print. Now, I won't go into any more spoilers or anything like that in this video, but if you have not encountered Invincible yet in any form, I really encourage you to pick it up. You can still find some of these Ultimate collections around. They have trade paperbacks, and they even have both soft and hardcover compendium editions, really beautiful formats, library editions. There's so many ways to collect Invincible, but if you're a fan of superhero books, I highly recommend you check it out. Okay, and last but certainly not least is a book I'm actually still making my way through, if I'm perfectly honest with you, but I've read enough of it to just highly recommend it for a prompt like this. This is the Superman run by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason Omnibus. These are by the same creators that did that Batman and Robin Omnibus earlier in this video. This is the Superman run of the DC Rebirth era. This was coming out, I believe, around the time Dan Jurgens was on Action Comics, if I'm not mistaken, but this book also really focuses on a father-son dynamic. This is Clark and John Kent, Superman, and the up-and-coming Superboy. who will be his own Superman before too long. This book, kind of like Batman and Robin, is a beautiful reflection on one of the biggest superheroes in the world and how he relates to a young son. I really, really love the warmth this book has for that father-son dynamic. It feels in the same vein as Batman and Robin, but a little bit brighter because Superman is a much more optimistic, lighter character in general, and we get to see that on display throughout this run. We still have Patrick Gleason's gorgeous artwork throughout it, and like he did in Batman and Robin, we get to just see so many of these tender moments just beautifully rendered by this amazing artist. I love the way that these creators leaned in once again to those father-son dynamics, and I love that DC Comics saw fit to give us almost a matching set of Omnibus here. Instead of kind of the black colors, we have kind of a red and yellow in the case of Superman, but these look like a matching set of books on the bookcase. We even have the same kind of father-son poses for Batman and Damian as we did here with Superman and John. It really is just brilliant stuff. As I say, I am still making my way through this omnibus, but I have loved every moment of what I've read thus far. If you'd be interested in a full review of this on the channel someday, let me know in the comments below. I'll see what I can do. Like I said, this has been a fun read so far, and I think it's a really great example of what you can do with father and son stories within the DC universe. Don't miss out on Superman by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason. And with that, I think we've made it to the end of must-read father-son comic books. Like I mentioned, these are not all emulation-worthy father-son dynamics, but they are stories that had a heavy father-son component to them. I think all of them were really captivating and worth reading. And personally, I had a blast with this prompt. It was fun to try to cherry-pick examples of this idea, the father-son dynamic, across my library. I feel like these choices are pretty all over the place, and I really like that. But I'm sure I'd missed a ton of other great father-son renderings in comic books as a medium, so I hope you can give me good comments. Give me some great recommendations. What are some of your favorite or most noteworthy father-son dynamics in the world of comic books, Marvel, DC, or other? Let me know all of those. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or if I haven't reviewed some of the ones seen here in this video. You can go ahead and drop me a comment for that as well, and I'll see what I can do. Thank you again so much, everyone who's watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave that like, comment, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thank you so much again. Have a good one.